Before we start, I have two things to say. First, I have midterm 1 and lab 1 graded. They've been graded for a while. This is the last chance to pick them up in class. After this, you have to come to my office and explain to me why you haven't been in class for the last 2 weeks. Second, there is an extra reading for this lecture and the next one. It's by Francis Walker, and it's on the website, like all the extra readings. Please make sure you take a look at that for next week if you haven't already read it. Sorry, for Wednesday if you haven't already read it. And while you do, think about the demographic transition and think about Thomas Jefferson. Okay? I think those ideas will suggest it themselves. Okay, so today we turn aside, we leave the Chinese migration to California behind and return to a more East Coast sort of focus on the Gilded Age, on immigration, what I'm calling the early urban and industrial era. This is also known as the Gilded Age, period after the Civil War, when the United States changes in yet another important way. In a big sense, and I'll make this point again, the big forces are the same as the ones we talked about in the early 19th century. That is, we're talking about pressure on European peasants coming from ever greater productivity in the United States combined with globalization, cheaper transportation, and so on. But there's a difference. The technological changes that we see in the 19th century are they may be the same type as earlier, but they're on a different scale. They're much, much larger, and the demands for labor are both larger and of a different sort. Okay? So it's a different type. Also, the immigrant groups that come in the later 19th century and the early 20th century are different. We focused very much on the Irish and the Germans, are two archetypal rural to rural migrants and rural to urban migrants. In this period, we're talking much more rural to urban and even urban to urban, but we'll be focusing instead on the Italians as representative of Southeastern Europe in general, and the largest example of it, and Jews from Russia, which is the other very large group in this period. As with the Germans and Irish, we're going to compare those two, sort of archetypal, and it's nice to compare these two groups. They have very different causes, very different experiences, and we'll talk about both of those in this lecture. Right? So, main points: the Gilded Age was characterized by a new phase of industrialization and new immigrant experiences. Industrializations made Americans richer and more urban, but also less equal. This idea will hopefully hit at the end of the lecture. This less inequality is an interesting theme, one that we'll return to again at the end of the 20th century or the beginning of the 21st century. And the second point: labor migration, mainly from Italy, and refugee migration from Russia, filled the new factories and cities. The attraction of jobs, however, was not the only reason that these people came. Note, again, the word labor migration, I believe I used that term in reference to the Chinese. I mentioned that the Chinese were kind of the first labor migrants. They were the first group that came to the U.S. with the stated intention of not staying, but returning. And remember, one of the consequences of that is that they came generally as single individuals, mostly overwhelmingly male in the case of the Chinese, less overwhelmingly, but still overwhelmingly male in the case of the Italians. The same story. The Italians will see, like the Chinese, come as single individuals with an intention to return. And in many cases, they're successful. The Italians do have a very, very high return migration rate, but also many stay. And we'll see how that plays out. The refugee story from Russia is also the first of many refugee stories. This is different from today. When we hear refugee, we mean this in a kind of a legal sense. There is such a thing as a refugee visa. And in order to be a refugee in the current era, you need to meet certain legal requirements. That's not the case here. Here, this is before there are limitations on immigrants from Europe. 1882, there are restrictions on immigrants from China, but not from Europe. So the Russian Jews are free to come. They don't have to qualify as refugees. So I'm using the term in a slightly different sense. But I will argue that they certainly are refugees because anybody coming from Russia at this time, under the conditions that they fled, would certainly be a refugee. Okay, questions about that? Good. All right, then. The outline. I want to do it this way. First, talk a little about the new industrial immigrants in general, and then specifically about the Italian experience, the agro-towns, the land loss, I should put that in quotes, and bad harvest of the late 1880s, and then contrast that with the experience of the Russian Jews and the pogroms also of the late 1880s, 90s, and early 20th century. Then I'm going to talk more about industrialization in the U.S. Right? So we'll start with the story sort of the homelands, essentially, the factors that are affecting people's decisions to leave, and then we'll look at what they find in the United States. Labor demand in the United States is a big part of the story, but as I said, the main point is not the only thing. There are very strong narratives that we can tell about Italians and Russians why they would have wanted to come why they would have wanted to leave their homelands. So I don't want to present the image that the U.S., which is industrializing at a furious pace at this time, is simply a magnet for jobs. It is, but there is, as always, more to the story than that. Right? We'll talk about cities. We may or may not get to ethnic enclaves and political machines. If not in this lecture, then we'll talk about it in the next lecture when we deal with the reaction to this new wave of immigration that breaks in the 1880s and 90s and early 20th century. Okay, so new industrial immigrants. Again, this is more of an outline slide. First, the characteristics, then the homelands. So the most important new characteristic that contemporaries remarked on is starting after the Civil War, there's an increase in the southern and eastern European component of the migration. Now, as you can see from this graph, which shows the total numbers of migrants, I think this is in 5-year averages, okay, so it's a little bit more smooth. If we were seeing single years, it would be much more jagged, reacting to short-run economic changes and so on. But as you can see from this graph, there's still a very substantial migration that is not from southern and eastern Europe, and that is from northern and western Europe. In other words, the Germans and the Irish and the Scots and so on, they're still coming, very large numbers. But as a percentage, you can see it falling pretty dramatically. And this is because overall, the numbers of migrants is rising at a tremendous rate. And so by the end of the century, we're seeing dominance in the southern and eastern Europe. And this is just another way of really looking. Well, it's a complement of that very complicated map of Europe, that was drawn with all the different hash marks showing the spread of emigration in Europe from the northwest to the southeast. Well, if emigration spread, the U.S. is one of the bigger receiving countries, so immigration will also take the same change from northern, western to southern and eastern. If we had this similar map for South America, we'd see similar changes. Many of the groups that are migrating at this time are also going to South America, also going to Australia and other immigrant-friendly places. This is a map showing a simple graph illustrating change in the age composition. Right? So the blue dots are age 14 to 44, which is broadly the age of working age, and under 14 are shown in red. And these are just simple regression lines through the dots every year. But what it shows is really that the under 14 is maybe staying flat, maybe falling a little bit, but that prime age, that immigration is becoming more concentrated in the 14 to 44 age group. And the reason, arguing, is that that goes hand in hand with the labor migration. So this is the influence of the Italian immigrants that we'll talk about. They're coming much more frequently as single males. Obviously, this is a significant change, but it's also, well, it's going from maybe 60% to 80% over the century. So it's important, and but perhaps not overwhelming. Still, there are children coming. There are still families coming. Okay, let's start with Italy. Conditions in Italy. Italy is not a homogeneous country. No country is really homogeneous, but Italy is less homogeneous than most. It's not a country until 1870, because like Germany, it's a collection of principalities, independently ruled or misruled, as the case may be. Some of the states were owned by the Catholic Church, but as Italy was, even after Italy is unified, it's widely recognized by Italians and others that there's a big divide between the north and the south. That northern Italy is much more like France or Switzerland, where they border. This is where Italy is industrializing, and this is true today too. I mean, this is where Italy's strongest economy is in the north. In the south, it becomes more and more agricultural and more poor. It is not the case, however, that migration follows that pattern. Outmigration from Italy is not simply a northern or a southern phenomenon, as a story one might have guessed before, right? Just as the story of emigration spreading from northwestern to southeastern was one sort of following the industrialization story. It's not quite the case with Italy, even though the north of Italy is industrializing, and so people are wealthier there. We might expect that to be the place that's undergoing the demographic transition first, and thus sending immigrants first. In fact, what seems to determine it more is land tenure. And there are two broad paradigms of land tenure in Italy, but an infinite number of local variations. And they have to do more with accidents of history, more with the way in which Italy was united, the way in which serfdom ended, and as well as political decisions made after unification of Italy. Areas with red dots represent places that are dominated by relatively few large estates. Right? In these places, mainly in what I would call the center, Italy, near the north-south, I guess called Mezzogiorno, these places, and again, this is somewhat of a generalization because there are differences within these provinces. But in a big hand-waving kind of way, these places are dominated by relatively large estates. Whereas in the blue areas, there are many more small land holdings. And again, this difference is also recognized by contemporary Italians. It's understood. It is a goal of many governments to increase the number of land holdings. And some of that, and to some extent, that is done by confiscating church land owned by the church, even as late as the 9th century. Remember that in northern and western Europe, they did that a long time ago. But they're finally getting around to confiscating church land in Italy only in the 19th century. And in some cases, they use that, sometimes successfully, sometimes unsuccessfully, to try to increase holdings of small landholders. The difference, though, what's key here is, as I said, the lust for land is particularly great among Italians. Among everyone, I don't think that's untrue of other people as well, but some commentators think that it is somehow has a special component in Italy, and the word in Italian is campanilismo, which comes from campanile, bell tower, and it has to do with an affinity for the land and the people that is within hearing range of the bell tower. It also has to do with pride in how tall one's bell tower is, but that's another story. The land tenure story, combined with or next to this idea of campanilismo, this particular strong attachment to the land, explains this motivation of Italian immigrants to return. What motivates them to leave is poverty. The factors that we've talked about, which were that agricultural prices are falling, and there's globalization. So peasants everywhere are having tough times. No difference in Italy. In particular, in the late 1880s, there are 5 or 6 years of very bad harvests, and people are on the verge of starvation. So, but it is from these places, the blue dots, where people generally emigrate and try to come back to. And the reason is because there are land markets there, because they have an opportunity. The dream is to leave, go to the United States, make some money, come back, and better condition. It's exactly the same story as we told about the Chinese. What happens, unfortunately, is that the land market, while it exists, is still kind of thin. And so when the first migrants come back with money in their pockets, they buy land. That sets off ever larger waves of migrants to try to do the same thing. The price of land gets bid up, and it rises well above the possibility, above its value as a productive asset. So people buy land at high prices and then wind up emigrating again to pay the mortgage. So in some sense, it's a fairly sad story, but in some sense, it's a happy story because eventually many of those people wind up staying in the United States and forming an Italian community. In the red areas, where land tenure is harder, is difficult. That's where the places are dominated by these relatively large estates. In those areas, immigration is less common. And what happens instead is radicalization, where farmers unite to either better their condition one way or another. There's systems that are reminiscent of sharecropping in the United States that go on here. But organization and radicalization are what happen when there is no land market. When there's a land market, you get immigration, return migration, and often price rising to absurd levels. Turn, if we may. What are the questions about that? Does anyone? Yeah, well, the radicalization is, well, this is the 1880s. Marx is around, and if you live in a region where buying land is impossible, what happens is the local peasants, instead of emigrating, which is, I don't want to say that everybody behaves this way. Sort of the archetypal pattern is that immigration, for the purpose of acquiring money to come back and not be able to buy land, that's not an appealing option. So instead, you stay home and you start political parties, and you try to organize the peasants into increasing wages. You try to influence the government to create, to take over church land and make more small landholders. As I said, this was understood by the government at this time, that places where landholding was beyond the reach of peasants, that was a tough situation. That was bad. That was understood to be unstable. It was something that the government didn't want to persist. But of course, it's hard to take land away from rich people. Yeah. Well, they could, and certainly some did. No doubt about that. But remember that these aren't really great bargains, and it's pretty quick that those land prices get pretty high. And this Campanile plays a role too. There isn't a sense in the late 19th century that Italy is Italy, and I'm just as happy, in San Francisco as in San Diego or something like that. These are not equivalent. There's a huge cultural gap between the north and the south, for example. But even from one village to another, my bell tower is just better than yours. So I want to live there. Right? Okay, to contrast this, let's turn now to the story of Eastern European Jews. The story of Eastern European Jews in this period is very different from the Italians, but it's not very different from the story of Jews throughout history. The story of Jews throughout history is persecution. Generally mild persecution, but it's always often been punctuated by pogroms and expulsions, such as pogroms such as those that occurred during the Black Death, for example, when Jews were widely blamed for the bubonic plague. In 1290, Jews were expelled from England, in 1306 from France, in 1492 from Spain, in 1497 from Portugal, and hundreds of other expulsions from hundreds of other places. It's just that in that period, there weren't very many large countries, so it's kind of boring to read the whole list. But by the mid-19th century, at least for Western Europe, with the exception of Spain and Portugal, Jews were officially tolerated. They were officially emancipated. So anti-Semitism was not the rule of the nation between Spain and Russia, but in the part of Europe we call Western Europe, I should say, again, excepting Spain and Portugal. But in the East, toleration is much lower, and if it arrives at all. After 1791, Jews are confined to this area, which is called the Pale. It's a very large area, you can see, but it's the western boundary of Russia. And further, they're segregated into separate villages, or shtetls, as they're called, and in urban areas, they're segregated in ghettos, the original use of the term. Like the Irish penal laws, over time various rights are denied, printing presses are closed, and conscription laws in particular are very harsh. Some places there are 25-year terms of service in the mid-1800s, and these only apply to Jews. So again, very different from the trends in the West. There's a brief respite from this in 1860, when Alexander II becomes Tsar, and he finally frees the Russian serfs, and he also allows Jews to live outside of the Pale. But Alexander is assassinated in 1881, and that unleashes a new wave of pogroms, and that causes a big spike in emigration. Let's see, I have pictures. There are certainly gorier pictures, but they're no better resolution, so they aren't any fun. But the pogroms came in waves, first in 1881, then in 1887 more nasty laws are passed, and finally, after the failed revolution of 1905, the main wave of pogroms and emigration. Yes? Yeah, pogroms are special, and death squads would be the word we use for Latin America, but in this period, I'm not sure the origin of the term. These are very much in the same sense as death squads. They are not officially sanctioned, but they are not stopped either. The government is doing nothing about it. And so the result is, again, very large a migration of Russian Jews. You will not be surprised to learn that, unlike the Italians, these people do not plan to come home. They do not plan to return. They're going for good. And also, you won't be surprised that these migrations, unlike the Italians, are made up much more of families. Right. So again, we have these two different migration streams, parallel but different from the Irish and the German we talked about in the earlier period. Now it's the Italians and Jews. Again, these are not the only streams of migration, but these are the two most numerous. And since we have not enough time in this class to talk about everything, we have to make limits. All right. So what did these two groups find when they arrived in the United States? Well, they found economic development in the Gilded Age. This is a period when the Industrial Revolution enters a new and remarkably rapid growth. Along with that, the demand for unskilled labor booms. I'll have a little more to say about the role of unskilled labor, but that's a difference. In previous industrial revolutions, or previous to this, there was certainly room for unskilled labor. That's growing as mechanization takes hold. But the early industrial revolution relies on more skilled labor. And secondly, there's agriculture. There's big change, often overlooked. There are big changes in agricultural technologies, and these are particularly useful on the American plains, places that are flat, where big, bulky